Okay, so wellbeing measurement for schools is an approach that we've developed, and what it's about is helping schools to really understand what's going on for pupils and staff around their mental health and mental well-being. I work in a project called Cork, I'll tell you a bit more about that in a sec, developed it with some other colleagues here at Anna Freud, and really this builds on lots of experience that we have of working in this way with schools on kind of small scale, working with individual schools and groups of schools, but also doing this kind of work at quite large scale. So we work on a large project across Greater Manchester and Hampshire called Be Well. We survey something like 60,000 young people every year. And what we've done is taken some of that learning and experience and developed resources for schools to enable them to do some of the similar things that we do, but obviously on a smaller scale, and really in the way that works for you. So in terms of who we are, I work on a project called the Child Outcomes Research Consortium, and the real focus of what we do is looking at the kind of evidence of what's going on for children and young people, but also understanding what support young people are getting and what difference that support's making. So it's very much about building the evidence base about children and young people's mental health and well-being. And we work in close partnership and have done through all of this work with the evidence-based practice unit, which is a partnership between us here at Anna Freud and University College London, and the evidence-based practice unit do huge amounts of research into children and young people's mental health. And we work very closely with them on many, many projects. So this is coming from lots of experience in the fields of research, but also within our team, we have people with a background of working in schools. I used to be a teacher and then a head teacher, and as well as working in kind of health, voluntary community sector, youth work. So what is our wellbeing measurement for schools offer? Well, there's a huge range to it. The main focus today is on measuring pupil wellbeing, but helpful to see the other things that are on offer. We do have resources to support staff wellbeing. I'll tell you a bit more about that towards the end. We've got guidance on our website to help you to measure the impact of interventions that you might be delivering. We've got plenty of resources that provide support for schools around measuring and understanding well-being, and then some specific signposting for colleges, i.e. post-16, and for those working in the early years. But the majority of what we'll go through today is aimed at school-age children. So at the heart of our wellbeing measurement for schools offer are our 3 modular surveys. And these are 5 booklets of questionnaires that can be used in a range of different ways that we've selected based on our experience of doing this kind of work with schools, but also in consultation with young people. We talk to young people about what should be included. We talk to parents and carers, as well as talking to school staff. And other professionals kind of working around schools. So we talked to them about what should be included, and we shared with them some of the resources that we were thinking of developing, went backwards and forwards a bit to get something that we were all happy with. But this is very much comes from that kind of approach. And so within each of those booklets, which hopefully you've had a look at some of them, but if you haven't, absolutely doesn't matter. What they really are booklets of questionnaires. And we do a lot of work around using questionnaires, and we kind of go beyond calling them questionnaires and calling them validated tools. And what this is they're sets of questions. Some can be quite short sets of questions, some can be longer. We've gone for shorter in the context of these booklets. And how they might differ from a questionnaire that you might develop yourself is that there's actually a research basis behind them. So they've been developed. A lot of them have been used a lot in research, and many of them are also used in mental health settings, so in CAMHS services, people like that. And because they're over time and there's a research basis behind it, then that gives them a kind of robustness that means they're valid. So they measure what they're meant to measure. So if the questions are designed to understand a young person's emotional difficulties, then the questions have been tested that is actually what they measure, and aim to do that in a way that avoids some bias, which is quite tricky to do when you're developing your own questions. So it really avoids having leading questions, gives it a level of neutrality to it that can be really helpful. And they're also have been shown to be reliable. And what we mean by reliable is, if that person is feeling the same way in 3 weeks' time, they probably answer the same way, and you'd given and you'd get a similar score. So they've got that kind of, they've been tested and retested. So you can be confident as you can be with any questionnaire, that actually the information it's providing is telling you about what it tells you it's trying to tell you about, and that you can be pretty confident in the results that it provides. So I'm going to take you through what's in the booklets. They vary in length. They each have a number of short questionnaires, and we've grouped them together under 5 headings that we feel makes sense to schools. That doesn't mean you have to use all 5 together. If you wanted to do one of the questionnaires from the emotional health booklet, another one from relationships, and use that part of a survey or as part of an intervention, then that's absolutely fine. You may want to use just one, and that might be the right thing to do for you. It may be you want to combine 2 or 3 from across the different booklets. Or I was talking to somebody in a school yesterday, and they were focusing on relationships. So they were developing a survey, and they were going to use all of the questionnaires that relate to relationships. So different ways you can use them. But across the 5 booklets, a really broad range of things that these booklets will support you to measure and understand. So within emotional health, there's a focus on emotional difficulties and behavioural difficulties. So emotional difficulties being when people might be struggling and internalising those emotions, whereas behavioural difficulties, where that might be more externalising, so they may be acting out more. So a couple of questionnaires that measure that. Psychological well-being, so really thinking about positive well-being, so moving away from those feelings of having some difficulties, but actually feeling more positively about life. And then some questionnaires that specifically focus on stress and focus on anxiety, knowing that these are concerns for school staff. So that those 5 together and looking at emotional health doesn't mean you need to use all 5. You might just choose 1 or 2 of them. And we would say, and when you're deciding which to use, obviously consider the age of the children you're working with, not just in terms of the pitch of the questionnaires that you choose, but also the number of questions that you can expect them to answer. But we have, as far as possible, tried to go for short questionnaires. So I don't think we've got any that have more than 10 questions in them. So emotional health is the first. And then the second is around emotional strengths and skills. So these are the things we know that are how children are actually dealing with those difficult emotions. Life has its ups and downs, and all children, most children will have difficulties at certain points, that things that are upsetting. They may have difficult experiences, may have family stuff going on, or just the kind of, stresses of school life, exam periods, those kind of things can be hard. And what these emotional strengths and skills questionnaires look at is actually how able they are to deal with that. So it looks at emotion regulation, their coping, their ability to cope, and then their capacity to solve problems. And that can be around, by problem solving, it can be actually asking for help being a problem solving strategy. So how they might manage if they were having some difficulties emotionally. Third one is around school life. So this particularly focuses in on what's going on within school. The others, obviously, emotional difficulties may be within school and beyond school. Stress could be within school or beyond school, depending on what some of the causes of it are. But this booklet specifically focuses on school life. So ask some specific questions about their experience in schools, they feel about being at school, but then just dig a bit deeper into some specifics around experiences of bullying, and also their relationships with staff, that being really key to how young people feel around school. And we know that that feeling of school belonging is something that's very important to schools and is talked about a lot commonly. And these are some of the things that we know are indicators of school belonging, and the things that are kind of precursors of good levels of school belonging. We then have a specific booklet that looks at help and support. So that looks at where young people can feel they're getting their support, how they feel about that support. So focusing on peers and on family and having supportive relationships there, but also there's a set of questions that specifically asks around support at school and how young people feel about that. And the fifth booklet specifically focuses on relationships, and we know how important all of these relationships are to young people's emotional health, to young people's well-being. So although we've categorised these sets of questionnaires into 5 groups, they all interact with each other, which is why when we're thinking about how you might use them, you might use some questionnaires from one, some questionnaires from another. But we think helpful for schools to see them within those groupings. And so within relationships, it looks at relationships with parents and carers, relationships with staff, relationships with peers, also looks at peer pressure and the stress of that. And there is a specific questionnaire around loneliness. So lots of things that are covered within that. So I think just sort of pausing there, I mean, we've got 5 booklets, they've each got 4 or 5 questionnaires within that. That's a lot of information. And what we're very much not saying is you need to ask all of the young people in your school all the time, all of these questions, because that would be unwieldy for you, unwieldy for the kids, and would give you almost more data than you know what to do with. So to sit alongside those booklets of questions, we've developed quite detailed guidance and support. It's all on our website, it's all free. You can absolutely access it, read it at your leisure. But I think helpful to take you through some of it to understand how it all fits together. So what the guidance does is really say how you could use these questionnaires, and you can use them in all sorts of different ways. And the broader guidance on the website suggests how you might want to use it to monitor change within an intervention. So you might be working with a group of, I don't know, 8 to 10 young people. They're getting some additional support. Using one of the questionnaires, or maybe 2, just 1 or 2 sets of 5, 6 questions could be a way of measuring the change that was happening with that intervention. Ask them the questions at the start, ask them the questions at the end. If there's been a shift, then that's evidence that your intervention is making a difference. What you can also use them for is you could use them for identification of children that might be struggling. So you could ask some young people a set of questions, and it may tell you a little bit about where those problems might be or who might be struggling a bit more than others. What our most detailed guidance does, and this is based on what schools told us that they needed and wanted in terms of what they use, it really takes you through using it more as part of a whole school or a year group or even a class survey. Which what we mean by a survey is a set of questions that everybody answers, and then schools analyse and use that to kind of plan and support. So that's what I'm going to take you through now. In terms of who this approach would work for, the questionnaires vary in complexity, but we've chosen them to be as accessible as possible for school-age children. Definitely accessible for secondary age across all of the questionnaires. Majority of them will be fine in the older years in primary schools, but you know your kids better than I ever could. So do, if you're working with younger children, have a look and feel how appropriate questions might be. We tend to not use these kind of whole school surveys with children younger than about 8, partly because, well, mainly because, you know, you know, I'm talking to people who understand children, but you know, child development wise, being able to generalize about your emotions is something that actually younger children are not very able to do. So if you were to ask a question that says, you know, how have you been feeling over the last week or so, for somebody that's kind of 5, 6, 7, that's actually quite difficult for a young child to do. So they find it quite hard to answer the types of questions that are included here. If you're a young child, you're very much aware of your immediate emotions, not necessarily the general trends and patterns in how you've been feeling. So we feel that what we can offer you is appropriate for that upper end of primary school and into secondary school. And we wouldn't think that whole school surveys, sorry, actually the way to go with younger children. Okay, so moving on. So in terms of the steps, starting by planning, and that's very much what I've talked to you about already, thinking which questionnaire is going to be right for you, what are you interested in, but also thinking about the potential, whether it's going to be anonymous, so you know which children have answered the questions in which way, or that you don't know which questions have answered them. So important consideration. We know that children are more honest if it's anonymous, but if you know which children it is, that can help with targeting support. Some considerations there, all detailed in the step 1 of the planning. It also encourages you to think about planning for accessibility. So thinking about the needs of the children that you work with. And also thinking about, you're doing a survey, how are you going to complete it? Usually nowadays it's done electronically, so done online, give some guidance around that. But if you're doing something at quite a small scale, sometimes a big copy can be the smart way forward. And then guidance about who you should be telling that you're doing it, so informing parents, that kind of thing. What step 2 does is then give you the more practical things. You know, you thought about what you want to do, you've thought about what you want to include. What this does is really, based on our experience of working with schools, give you kind of checklists and things to think about to make it go smoothly. You know, considerations around timetabling, and some really just practical, like don't, you know, doing it on Friday afternoon, you're not going to get great results. But some of it, you know, thinking about the time it takes to complete it, that kind of thing. To support that, there are resources that we've developed that to share with teachers so they understand what's going on. There's some short videos and things that we develop, sometimes through projects that we've worked in that we can share with you, and that really demonstrate how to prepare and you know, set really solid groundwork for a good survey. So then the third step is actually carrying it out. So again, resources to support with introducing the survey to pupils, thinking about what to say, thinking about what to explain to them, and again, information resources for during the survey, examples of how you might explain some of the questions to children and young people, things to think about when you're delivering a survey, that, you know, things to have up your sleeve that just make it easier, thinking about things like support if anyone were to get upset, and all of that kind of thing. So again, lots in there. The fourth step is you've done the survey, you've collected all this data, what do I do with it? So for each of those booklets, it tells you how to score the questionnaire. So for most of the questionnaires, it gives you a score, and depending on the score, that tells you something about their emotional health or their emotional well-being. What we also provide is some comparators. So where these questionnaires have been used with large groups of young people, we provide you with information that says, you know, this was a typical score that young people got, and that can really help you to understand what your young people. We can do a really tailored offer for this, and we sometimes do this with groups of schools that really take you through this. You know, we can do the analysis for you. We do have to charge for that just because of the time that it takes, but it is there if you're interested. But we like to provide you with enough information that you can do it yourself. And just to illustrate, this is for a behavioural difficulties questionnaire. So you can see the questions, the statements. The young person's answered them. That's where the crosses are and the circles around them. And our scoring guidance tells you that the scoring goes 0 for never, 1 for sometimes, 2 for always. For most of the questions, for one of the questions, number 5, it's scored the other way around. So the scoring goes 2, 1, 0, all explained in the guidance. And then it tells you how to get to a total score. If you're doing it electronically, you can quite easily do this using Excel or even using, if you use a survey platform, they often will do this for you in terms of the scoring. So it's all there. It's pretty straightforward. That score of 6, what does a score of 6 mean? Well, using our guidance to support analysis, that's putting your results in context, then we can tell you that we used this survey in this behavioural difficulties questionnaire in a really large scale survey, you know, like 1,300 kids in year 9. What we found is that most young people, 85%, scored 0 to 5, 15% scored 6 to 12. 6 is seen as a cutoff to mean that actually that's higher levels of difficulty. So the person who I just scored it for on the previous page was showing high levels of difficulty. You would expect that within your score. But if you have more than around 15%, you start to think, okay, maybe the levels of difficulties here are higher than they are in other schools. So that might be an area to think about. Final stage, step 5. Again, lots of guidance there, resources. That really is to think, okay, we've got this data, this is what it's told us, what are we going to do with it? And there's guidance in there about how to feed back this information to pupils. You know, you told us this is what we're going to do about it. Thinking about how to work it through with school staff and getting them on board with any changes that might come out of it. Thinking about how you present this to parents, may well be of interest to parents, certainly to governors, incorporating that into an improvement plan. So there's lots of guidance to support with that as well. So they're the kind of main steps of doing the survey. We do have further guidance on using questionnaires for individual needs, as I talked about before, evaluating impact of interventions and support. So they're on there, so do have a look. There's also guidance around inclusion and accessibility, so safeguarding considerations, IG considerations, and also thinking about differences in culture and bearing that in mind when you're using these kinds of surveys. Okay, so I'm now going to see if we've had any questions come in. I've flicked onto the wrong side, flicked back. Have we got any questions come in, Georgina? Oh, is that because I've talked too much? If you do have questions, do send them in or drop us an email afterwards. Absolutely fine to pick those up. We'll just draw your attention to a few other things that we can offer. We do offer, and this is costed, but if you are delivering a specific intervention and you want some evidence of impact, we can do that. We cost it as low cost as we can. This comes in at about £1,000, but it sets out what we would do, and we work with you to really define what the intervention is, help you choose the right tools to measure it, and really work with you on the process of collecting data. So that is something that we can offer, but as I say, that is costed. We do have a staff wellbeing survey. There's a relatively small cost for this. It's £300 for primary, form, secondary. For that, we do everything for you. We provide you sign up. We give you a link to a staff survey. You share that with all of your staff. They fill it in. We do the analysis, and we provide you with a report that compares your school with other schools. So again, on the website, and we'll include it in an email afterwards. So really, if you think of doing your own staff survey, and you think, oh, £300 is a lot of money. If you've ever been the person, as I was, as a head, that got the job of pulling all of that together, you'll realise it's money well spent. More widely within Anna Freud, just awareness of things. We do have our 5 steps to mental health and well-being, which is a framework that helps schools kind of plan and develop their mental health and well-being. Links very nicely with our surveys. One of the areas that within that 5 steps is understanding need, and that's very much about doing the kind of things I've talked to you about today. Our Mentally Healthy Schools website and Resource Hub has hundreds, if not thousands, of resources to support mental health within schools. Vast majority of those are free. They're from all sorts of organisations. They're not just Anna Freud resources. And our Schools in Mind network is a newsletter that goes out, a regular newsletter that really tells you stuff that is going on, makes you aware of resources we might have. There's free low-cost webinars that come through in that as well, and also how to get involved in our projects. And we do run specific trainings for schools as well. These are some of the trainings that are on offer currently. A lot of focus on school attendance and mental well-being, looking at emotional-based school avoidance. The self-harm prevention, very popular with schools. We know that that's very much a live issue. And again, looking at online, which we know, again, a priority. So we really do try and develop our training courses based on what schools tell us. And finally, that is our website if you want to contact us.